We have the story from CBS Austin. Arrest made in arson incident at Travis County Democratic Party office. They say a Molotov cocktail was thrown inside the office and ignited during the early morning hours. So earlier I was wrong. I thought it did, but it did. The arson suspect was recorded on security cameras and a note was left at the scene. The Austin Fire Department says their arson investigators, along with the FBI, made the arrest. Ryan Faircloth, 30, is charged with second-degree felony arson and third-degree felony possession of a prohibited weapon. He remains in custody at Travis County Jail under a combined $40,000 bond for both charges. Early Wednesday morning, an outside camera recording a man throwing a rock through the front door of the Democratic Party office. He then came back with what appears to be an incendiary device, placed it inside the building, and then the fire ignited. Damage to the building was minimized because people at the bar across the street spotted the first flames and put them out with a fire extinguisher. Last year, vandals hit the same building, spraying graffiti across the front. That's when security cameras were installed that may help police find who was responsible for the latest damage. We were talking about the other day, related to this, what happens if Texas secedes or New Hampshire? And one of the things I was saying that, I guess people hadn't considered is what do the Democrats in Austin do if the Republicans in Texas say, we're out?
Right.
You can already see there's conflict between cultural factions.
That's how New York is. I mean, most of New York voted red. A lot of New York did. And the city controls most of it. So it's like when you talk about secession, what does something like New York City do?
You were there, right? You lived in the city?
Yeah. I was driving a box truck
during the riots?
Not the riots, but like leading up to the 2016 election. So I would see like all the signs for Hillary in one place and all the Trump signs in the rest of, upstate New York. Not that should be a gauge of how people are going to vote, but it was wild to see that all of upstate New York is one way.
It's so weird. But maybe it's because people in the cities are scared. They're scared to say anything.
Yeah. Country versus city.
True. If you put up a Trump sign in an area where there's 50 Hillary, I said Hillary, by the way. But
that's a real
saliva
slip.
popping in my throat.
Crystal.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris. That it's. I mean, maybe dangerous isn't the word, but maybe it is, and that's the problem with it. That's why we have secret voting. That's why your voting is anonymous.
Yeah. I wonder. So we did talk about Texas, and for those that don't understand know the context of the last episode, we had someone from the Free State Project in New Hampshire. There's a lot of people in New Hampshire who want to secede or form their own, nation state or whatever. And like a lot of people say things, if Texas can't, it won't happen. But there's also the conversation we've had where it's like the federal government wouldn't do anything. So look at California. California says outright, we no longer will allow the feds to enforce immigration law, actually stopping them. And that's a state saying the federal government has no authority here in this regard. And the feds say, okay, that's it. The emperor's got no clothes. Yeah. The moment California was able to say this, the moment cities in California were allowed to let non-citizens vote, the federal government lost its legitimacy because they couldn't enforce their own laws within the country. That's going to set off a cascade effect. But the interesting thing is what happens in a state like Texas. If Texas secedes, the belief is the feds won't do anything. But what happens when the Democrats in Austin call for help? The feds then nationalize the National Guard in neighboring states and send them into Texas to protect, the law and order. That being said, that's the context. Here's the next question. If that does happen and the government does nationalize or federalize the National Guard from New York, for instance, what will the majority of the New York State Republicans in all northern part say to the city? Because the people who are in the National Guard in that place probably come from some rural areas, from the city, from all over. And a lot of them are going to be rural and now working at the behest of, I think we could just see conflict, chaos.
Politically, they don't have much power, the red part of New York. And it's almost like New York City has already seceded from the rest of the state because they've locked out. Not to say that everyone who's red has not been vaccinated, but if you're not vaccinated, you're not allowed in that city anymore. You can't do anything. I have a friend went to 8 different bars in the past 2 days, turned away.
Wow.
At all of them. Went to her favorite cafe, told, we'll serve you if you sit outside, out there.
That's what they said when I called.
So they've locked out everybody else. I don't know how much political sway they have. I don't even know if they care about the city. They act like it's not there.
That's a good point. We didn't even talk about. New York City has basically already said, these people are not welcome here. And that's a large portion. I think half of Republicans are not vaccinated.
Yeah.
That means, straight up, Trump supporters, the staunch supporters of Trump, are completely cut off from New York City and Los Angeles and New Orleans and San Francisco. All of these cities that are rolling this out.
No zoos,
this
no
is
cafes,
secession.
No restaurants. Yeah. they've manufactured it in a way where it's not, you don't have to say secession, but they've kicked you out.
The weird part is, like, back in the day, you'd have a city block would secede from another city block. It'd be territory. But now it's kind of ideology. Like, too many people live close together that have different ideologies, so you can't, you know, like you said, the big city in Texas is Democrat, but all the surrounding areas is Republican. So I think rather than a secession, which would be like shattering a crystal-informed structure, you would have to somehow alter the way they interact, which these COVID restrictions seem to be doing.
Yeah.
Vaccine
And I should also
restrictions.
say that there's a lot of people in New York City who are also either vaccinated and against the mandates or not vaccinated. Doesn't mean they're red or blue, but
Yeah.
they're fighting. Like I know people who are working in sanitation who are fighting really hard to keep their jobs.
You know, this is interesting. We didn't even consider this when having these conversations about secession, that there could be people whose secret intention is the breakup of the U.S., and they do it through laws they know are partisan that will result in a soft secession.
Yeah.
Meaning New York City has basically said MAGA not welcome.